Okay, welcome back to our study of Ezekiel. We're winding down. It's chapter 45, and we're going to be talking about sacred land and offerings. And let's begin with the blessing. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam, asher kiddushanu b'mitzvotav v'tzivanu la'asok b'divrei Torah. Blessed are you, Lord our God, King of the universe, who sanctifies us with his commandments and commands us to engross ourselves in the words of Torah. Okay, so before we let's go ahead and get started then. Again, this is the Tree of Life Torah Slant Bible Study, and from Tree of Life Messianic Congregation in Katy, Texas, and I am Steve Sheik, the congregational leader, rabbi of Tree of Life. And so let's begin. Ezekiel 45 and verse 1. When you allot the land for inheritance, set apart an offering to Adonai, a holy portion of the land. The length will be 25,000 and the width will be 10,000. It will be holy within all its surrounding borders. Now, the Lord gave Ezekiel directions for the division of some of the promised land that would occur in the future. And Revelation, the book of Revelation, talks about apportioning the rest of the land, and that follows that follows in verses 47 and 48. So that's when that part of it will be revealed. And that's what I meant. It'll be revealed in 47 and 48, not in the book of Revelation. So these descriptions that we're going to see here don't coincide with any kind of division of the land that we've ever seen in the past. So it's always going to be new. And the amount of detail that goes into all of this stuff really does lead us to believe that there's going to be just a literal fulfillment sometime in the future, and it's a completely different kind of fulfillment or of allotments than what we've seen before. Because before they would follow geographic boundaries, and they would go up this wadi and down this wadi and down into a valley and across this mountain, and just kind of like some of the state boundaries that we have and national boundaries throughout the world that follow geographic boundaries. Well, or geographic features, rivers or mountains or whatever. This one's just going to be straight across, and I'll show you some photos of that or a map of that in a minute. In the future, the Israelites were to divide the land by lot, but the Lord was in control, and he would control the outcome. Now, one of the things this verse here and the next verses with it are kind of an abrupt stop, and you look at it and you say, well, how did we go from where we were before to now we've got this just talking about real estate? And I think that the implication here is that this land belongs to the Lord. He was the Israelites' inheritance, but he was going to allow them to live on his land and occupy it. It was always that way. He allowed them to live on his land, on the land of Israel, as long as they would follow his commandments and didn't do idolatry and all those other kind of things, which they did. And so therefore they lost the privilege of living in the land for a while. And then later on they were dispelled by the Romans after the temple was destroyed, and just many things that happened. That when the second temple was destroyed, that was destroyed because basically, the sages say that it was because of baseless hate. And there were, I think, before the Romans really got into destroying the temple and all that kind of stuff, the Jews had killed more people, had killed more Jews than the Romans did. Now later on, the Romans came in and did a lot more, but around the time of Yeshua and right after that, they had civil war after civil war, and you can read about it in Josephus's writing, and you'll see that they were killing each other by the tens of thousands. So anyway, this division of the land would be completely different than it was before. Now, and here they're supposed to set apart part of the land for the Lord's use only. I mean, it had holy purposes. This land was the very definition of holy, which is set apart and dedicated. And so that it was to be 25,000 cubits long and 10,000 cubits wide, which is about 8.3 miles by 3.3 miles. Now, the Hebrew text here has rods or reeds rather than the cubits, but the long cubits, you have to go with the long cubit, the 21 inches rather than the 18 inches, and so that would harmonize with all the other measurements in the preceding chapters. And so this land was to be considered holy within all of its boundaries. Totally, this set apart land would be holy and only for the purposes of religious worship, or I hate to use the word religious, but the only for worship purposes. Let's say it that way. All right. So, and I know that there's questions about, okay, what is it cubits? Is it rods? Is it this or that? And if you go with the rod thing, which it's exactly what it says, it doesn't say cubit in the Bible, then the size of everything is totally out of proportion to everything else in Israel, and it wouldn't fit in Israel very well. So I guess that's why all of the scholars have said, no, we have to use the long cubit to have it make sense. And so that's what I know. Rich and I have talked back and forth on this, and I really don't have a real good answer for all of that, and it is kind of confusing the way it was written out. So going ahead on verse 2, out of this there will be a holy place, 500 again cubits long by 500 wide. They're not even saying cubits, they're just saying 500 long by 500 wide, square all around, and 50 cubits for the open land surrounding it. From this area, you are to measure a length of 25,000 and a width of 10,000, which will be the sanctuary, which is most holy. It is to be the holy portion of the land for the Kohanim ministering in the sanctuary, who draw near to serve Adonai. It will be a place for their houses, as well as a place consecrated for the sanctuary. Now, within this stuff gets, it gets really detailed here. Within this area that we talked about before was to be a space of 500 cubits by 500 cubits. That's 833 feet by 833 feet. And this was the size of the temple complex. And you can go back to chapter 42 and verse 20 to get those measurements again. And then surrounding this complex, you can see it kind of right here. Surrounding this complex was an additional 50 cubits or 83 feet. There was kind of a green belt. And now this drawing that they've got here, they've got, it's supposed to be 500 by 500. Well, they got it rectangular instead of square, and so I don't know why they did that. But the temple complex was supposed to be square, 500 cubits by 500 cubits. Now the temple sanctuary then would stand within this outer part that you see here, and that's like 25,000 by 10,000, and that will be for the Zadokite Levites, and so they would live around this area, and so you kind of get a sense of that right there. And here's a map then of the division of the land to the different tribes, and how that's going to play out then in the millennial period. And this sacred district is where we're talking about here tonight. Okay, and so the land, going back here, the land surrounding the temple was this land here, 8.3 miles by 3.3 miles is what that's going to look like. And then, all right, so let's go ahead and look at that next, the next verses. An area of 25,000 long and 10,000 wide will be for the Levites, the ministers of the house. It will be a possession for themselves, 20 chambers. You will give the city possession of an area 5,000 wide and about 25,000 long, alongside the offering of the holy allotment. It will be for the whole house of Israel. All right, so what we would have here, the non-Zadokite priest, they would be living in this area up here. Again, that's 8.3 miles this way, 3.3 miles this way. Now the city then would get 5.15 or 5.5, something like that. A little over 5, a little bit over 4 miles this way, and then 8.3 miles this way. And that would be for their lands. And this city, and it would also have a green belt around it, and so that it would not, the city itself would not defile this area of the temple, the greater temple grounds here. See, so that's how that worked out. The other Levites would occupy that land that was north of where the temple land would be, and where the Zadokite priest, Kohanim, would live. And so it would be, that's where the non-Zadokite priest would be. Okay, those were the other Levites. They were Levites, but they were the ones that were going to be in charge of just maintenance of the facility, and they would not do actual priestly duties. And under the so they lived right there, and then the Zadokite priest lived surrounding the temple. If you remember back in the Mosaic time frame, Mosaic period, with the judges, during the judges, and then later on with the kings and so forth, the Levites were scattered out all over Israel. They had sanctuary cities where that served a function, and the Levites, they lived in all over the place, and because they're the ones that provided guidance on Torah things, and they would be the judges. It was called a Beit Din, which is a house of judging, and they would be responsible for the education of the younger ones in things of Torah. So they were scattered out all over. Well, now in this particular instance, in the millennial period, the Lord has seen fit to put them in this one area north of where the temple would be, and that's where they would live. They would have their houses, and it also says, and there would have 20 rooms, chambers they call it. And so I try to find an explanation or some kind of an idea of what these 20 rooms or buildings were, what it looked like, or what the function would have been, and could really find none. But since they were in charge of the maintenance and all of the administration of the temple and everything, those rooms could very well have had something to do with that function. We go down and we talk about the prince. Now, remember, we talked about who the prince was, and he would be some kind of someone lower down in the rank structure to Yeshua. Yeshua would be the ultimate king of Israel and basically the entire world. But this prince, and a lot of people would say, well, this is David reincarnated or resurrected or whatever, because we don't believe in reincarnation, of course. But then others say, well, it would have been someone from the line of the lineage of David that would be coming in here. And so again, there's arguments on both sides of that coin, and I've heard people, very noted scholars say, no, it's going to be a descendant of David, and other ones say, no, I believe that it's going to be actually David himself coming back, and he'll reign there as the prince for 1,000 years, because by that time he will have a incorruptible body. So we don't know, and I'm not really sure that it's significant anyway. So let's look at this. The prince will have a portion on either side of the holy allotment, that's the east and the west, and the city's property adjacent to the holy offering, and the city's property on the west side westward, on the east side eastward. Its length will correspond to one of the tribal portions from the western boundary to the eastern boundary. It will be land for him to possess, for him as a possession in Israel. My princes will no longer oppress my people. They will give land to the house of Israel according to their tribes. All right, now, the prince would receive a special allotment, and that would be to the west. We'll look at a map of it here, and to the east of the city portions, and also the holy areas. Let's see if we can look at that. No. Let's go back up and look at this again. All right, so you'd see all of this land over here on the side. This would be the prince's land on that side, and then this would be the prince's land on that side. And then you can see it down here. This sacred district would be right smack in the middle, but then all of the land to the east here and all the land to the west then would be the land for the prince, as it were. So in the past, the prince of the kings, the royalty and so forth, did not have vast real estate holdings, like they wouldn't take over a large district, like say take over the area around Tiberias, or they would not take over the entire land of Hebron, the land around Hebron and so forth. They didn't have these massive estates, but they had their palaces and their little castles and so forth. But at the same time, in the past, these kings would they would take land from their people. If they wanted something, they would just go out and take it. You remember the story of King Ahab and I believe it was Naboth, where he had a great orchard, and Ahab wanted it, and so he had the guy murdered so he could have his land. And that sadly was not an unusual circumstance there in Israel at the time. And so this allotment of land to the prince himself was meant, and it says it right in the Bible, that it was meant to discourage or to diminish the opportunity and the desire of these kings or leaders to go out and take land from the people and oppressing the people themselves. So the rest of Israel beyond this sacred zone then would be divided up to the various tribes. And it appears that, a lot of these divisions here are strictly a mathematical allotment, rather than in the old days when they allotted the land to the various tribes. It was done as a function of their own population. In other words, the ones that had a much higher population then would get more land. That's where you saw Manasseh and Ephraim. They got the lion's portion of the land up north because they had these huge tribes. And so this, though, is going to be just more egalitarian in the millennium. And you'll see here that, how they've just kind of divided. Now, Judah still gets a big one, and Reuben. And if these drawings are accurate, and if you look all of this stuff up, it gets a little dodgy as to what the boundaries here and so forth. So I think a lot of it is depending on the interpretation that whatever the scholar has on this, and where the boundaries may very well be. Because I saw some of these things where it was just ridiculous. They had, the various tribes going, just way to the east or way up to the north, and so forth. So we will not really know exactly how that's going to work out. All right. Comments or questions before we go on? Okay. Thus says, this verse 9, thus says Adonai Elohim, let it be enough for you, princes of Israel. Get rid of violence and destruction, execute justice and righteousness, take away your oppression from my people. It is a declaration of Adonai. Now, Lord, next, he commanded the leaders of Israel to stop destroying the people. Now, I think in this case, what the Lord had in mind was not particularly future kings, but he was going back to the past kings, the ones who had oppressed their own people. And you'll remember in the earlier chapters in Ezekiel where they were indicted by the Lord for the way that they treated God's people in the land, and they were not good. And a lot of these kings were just flat evil. And so the Lord now has them in mind when he's saying to Ezekiel, tell the children of Israel, or tell the exiles now that the leaders to stop destroying the people. Don't take their land. You have to be fair with them. and this is it's a common cry from the Bible. If you look at like Leviticus 19:35, where the law says you must not be dishonest in judgment and in measurements of length or weight or of quantities, and not only in your judgment, but in your business dealings too. You have to be honest. And then there's another with talking about the fairness of things. In Numbers 35, you have the cities of refuge, and I'll refresh your memory there. The city, I'll get to you in just a second, Carmen, before I lose my train of thought here. The cities of refuge were set up. There were 6 of them, and 3 in the north, 3 in the south, so that if someone inadvertently kills someone else, and then their family starts chasing the dude to exact, revenge or justice on him, those cities were set up, and then nobody could touch them until they had an actual hearing, and judges and witnesses and all of that kind of stuff, all the evidence. And then if they found that the person did not commit murder, but maybe it was homicide, where they're working and the guy swings an axe, and the axe head comes off and hits his coworker in the head and kills him. Well, today we would look at that and say it's an accident. Back in those days, they were a little less, how you would say, a little bit less tolerant on that. Blood was blood. And so they had a little bit different rules on that. That's why they had the cities of refuge. Okay, go ahead, Carmen.
On these kings that were evil to their people, are they Jewish? Are they all Israelites, kings doing this, treating their people bad?
Yes.
Taking their lands and stuff. So okay, so it wasn't another country king.
No.
Over there.
The Lord is he's going after his own people and his own kings.
Okay. Yeah.
You'll see that well, I gave you the example with Ahab, King Ahab.
Yeah.
Now, up in the north, you got to remember that, when the kingdom split, you had Rehoboam and Jeroboam, and one went north and the other one stayed in Jerusalem. All of the kings that followed in that, in the land of what they call the kingdom of Israel, of the northern 10 tribes, all 100% of those kings did evil in the sight of the Lord. Every one of them was rotten.
Right.
And they abused their people. And it's kind of like what is the saying, power corrupts and absolute power corrupts absolutely, or something like that.
Yeah.
That's the way they were. And then you see down in the southern part with Judah and Benjamin, and then the remnants of Simeon, that those kings, every once in a while you'd have a good king, but for the most part they were not so hot. They were idolaters. They were just self-centered, selfish people, and that's why the Lord now is saying, well, you've got to stop.
You mean kind of like what we have now here?
Well, it's kind of like, the swamp. If you want to talk about the swamp, both sides, that would be a good analogy. So, and he's telling them, okay, don't take their lands. You don't have any right to take the lands of these people, because it's my land. It's not your land. This land is my land. This land is not your land. So you can't take it away from the people that I've allowed to live there. And then he tells them that you should govern with true justice. And several places within the Torah, it calls for justice for my people, and you shall do justice. And so that's what the Lord is pushing here at this point. Okay, so verse 10, you are to have just balances, an honest dry measure, and an honest liquid measure. The dry and liquid measure will be of a uniform measure. The bath will contain 1/10 part of an omer, and the ephah 1/10 part of a omer. And the standard measure will be the omer. The shekel will be 20 gerahs, and 20 plus 25 plus 15 shekels will be your mina. All right, so what he's telling them there is that honesty and integrity was a must. You had to do that in business, and you also had to do that in the world of politics and in judgment and governance, as would be a good way of saying it. That the Lord required, he demanded that these people be judicious and be righteous in their judgments. And let's face it, they didn't do it. They were, they kind of went off on their own way, and the people suffered. And, again, you can say that just about any country in the world at any time in the world, that the people in power do what they want to, and the rest of us just suffer. And so to varying degrees anyway. So so what he's doing is Ezekiel is basically setting up or codifying what the measurements of commerce would be. And by doing that, I believe he's setting up a standard of measurement and so forth, but a standard of integrity for the people, that, okay, you shall have, this is what your balances are going to be. Your dry measure is going to be honest, it's going to be correct, and the liquid measures are also, have to be uniform, and they have to be correct. And so you can't shortchange people, and that would follow over from business on into government. And so basically he's telling them that they should be fair in all of their commercial dealings. And the basic dry and liquid measures, an ephah is about 1/2 bushel, and then a bath, bath, or however they spelled it in Hebrew, I don't remember, was about 6 gallons, and those were to be standard and equal. An ephah is should always be 1/10 of an omer, and an omer is 5 to 6 bushels. And if you're counting all of this kind of stuff up, and the bath should always be 1/10 of an omer. So there again, the ephah and the bath were equal measurements. So, and an omer was about 5 to 6 bushels, something like that. So, and then likewise, the weights would be the same. The weights would be consistent. They would be unchanging, and like one shekel would be about 2/5 of an ounce, and it was always going to measure an equal 20 gerahs, which was 1/5 of an ounce. I know that's this stuff gets kind of tedious and gets nerdy, but and also now people will try to figure out, okay, how much is that in today's money, and what are we talking about here? It really doesn't matter. That was their standard of measurement. What Ezekiel was, what the Lord was telling Ezekiel, telling the people through Ezekiel, is that everything that you do, you have to do it correctly with just balances. And the just balances went over into the judicial system. There were lots of rules back in the day for people, much further back than Ezekiel's time, for the people to make sure that they had the correct weights and balances, and there was no funny business. You know, none of the butcher putting his thumb on the scale, as it were, you know, to make it appear to be heavier. So, but these were, you know, all throughout the Middle East, there were, you know, the weights and measures, they were not all that accurate and they varied. But this one here, this is what the Lord said. This is how you will set it up, and don't deviate from it. Don't make any lighter ones or heavier ones or whatever. This is the way it's got to be. So he delineated the proper standard of volume and measure and length for the people. All right, so verse 13. You are not to have stones of different weights in your bag, large and small. You are not to have in your house ephahs of different measure, large and small. You must have a full and honest weight and a full and honest measure, so that your days may be long on the land that Adonai your God is giving you. Now, those are the things that the Lord was talking about. That's back from Deuteronomy, all right? And then in Proverbs, it says, dishonest scales are an abomination to Adonai, but an accurate weight is his delight. And so I think you probably get the picture of this, and we'll go on here unless there are any questions on this. All right, verse 13. This is the offering that you are to set apart. And this is offerings for the prince, actually. This is the offering that you are to set apart, a sixth of an ephah out of an omer of wheat, a sixth of an ephah out of an omer of barley, along with the set portion of oil, a bath of oil, as the tithe of the bath for each core, which is about 10 baths. Or an omer, since 10 baths are an omer, and one lamb of the flock out of 200 from the well-watered pastures of Israel. These are for the grain offering, burnt offering, and fellowship offerings, to make atonement for them. It is a declaration of Adonai. All right, so I know I've thrown a lot of measurements and stuff at you, but let's see if we can unravel a little bit. Unlike in the past, the leaders that Israel had in the past were not to, these people were not to pick up that habit that the old princes had. So the prince in the future, this future prince, is going to be very faithful to the Lord and upright in all of his dealings with the Israelites. And because why? Because his boss is going to be Yeshua HaMashiach, Jesus the Messiah. He'll be the chief ruler during the millennium. But then this prince then will serve right under Yeshua, and he'll oversee the temple offerings and probably lots of other things too. So the Israelites in the future would bring offerings to the temple periodically, but how often and how that works is not really clear. It doesn't spell it out very, very clearly. The amounts that follow probably represent what they would bring for service in the temple. And as the following verses show, as we get into those, the prince would take the lead. He would be the example in presenting these offerings to the Lord with the assistance of the Zadokite, Levite, Kohen, the priest, and other Levitical priests at various times during the year. So the Lord specified what the people should bring, that they should bring that sixth of an ephah, which is 1/12 of a bushel, and of wheat and barley, and you take out of each. They were taken out of an omer. Okay, the 1/12 was taken out of the omer, and the omer was what, 5 to 6 bushels, and so I haven't found anybody yet that looks at all these numbers and have come up with some kind of a explanation or a divine revelation, as it were, about what these different things meant. But I think what they were is that these were the measurements that they, and the volume, the weights, and so forth that they used back in those days. And the Lord, through Ezekiel, was telling him, okay, this is standard. He was standardizing the weights and measures so that people wouldn't be cheated, and so that the weak would not be overrun by the strong. And so it's kind of interesting that some of these on the grain and some of the others were 1/10 of the volume or weight. But then when it says to a burnt offering of a kid or a lamb, it was just 1 out of every 200. So it was not 10%, it was only 5%. So and they were to, it's like one sheep out of every 200 is what that was. So that'd be 5%. No, it wouldn't. It'd be even less than that. But the grain measures and the wheat measures, so that would be actually 0.5%. 1 sheep out of 200. So these were the quantities that they were to offer in grain, burnt offerings, peace offerings, and to make atonement for themselves on the occasion that would follow the Passover and Sukkot. So making atonement in this case signifies maintaining a proper, upright relationship with God, or getting a person, or getting oneself back into the proper relationship with God. Okay. The required offering for grain would be 1/6 of all produce. 1% of all oil will be given to use in the temple, and 1 of every 200 animals, which is just a 0.5% then. I know it gets kind of confusing. Verse 16, all the people of the land must give this contribution to the prince in Israel. It will be the prince's role then to give the burnt offerings, grain offerings, and drink offerings at the feast, new moons, and Shabbatot. In all the Moedim of the house of Israel. Now, here, I'm going to stop here for a second, where it talks about at the feast, new moons, and Shabbatot, in all the Moedim of the house of Israel. Because one of the scholars that I was reading says, well, it doesn't really mention any of the other Moedim or the feasts, so we can't assume that since he didn't mention them, we can't assume one way or the other that they wouldn't be following those. But I think they, it's just the way that was written out, because it says in all the Moedim of the house of Israel. So the Moedim did not go away. What the Lord said about the feast, they were for forever, an everlasting observation or celebration for you. So the people should bring these to the prince, and he would then offer them on their behalf on these special occasions, the feasts, new moon celebrations, and Sabbaths, and he would make these offerings for the people as a for the people as one, as a corporate body, to secure their corporate atonement. And I've mentioned it before in this lesson and in other ones too, that these millennial sacrifices will be memorials of the Messiah's death and his death, and or the means whereby the uncleanness of their sins as believers would be removed. So the worshipers could continue to enjoy intimate fellowship with God. These sacrifices will not result in the people's salvation any more than the sacrifices of the Mosaic system provided salvation. All it did was it covered the sin. It did not take the sin away or the guilt away. So I think we talked about a little bit where one of the commentators that I was reading said that, well, there will be no one left at the end of the Great Tribulation that there won't be any sinners left. They're all going to die during the tribulation. I don't read the Bible that way, and we can see here that there would be an example of how the people may they were not all, I would say, sanctified. They were still sinners. They had not accepted Yeshua in some cases in the corporate body of Israel, and so there's still going to be the sacrifices are important, but they will not atone in the sense that it will not give them salvation. That's a lot of words for that just to say that only through the shed blood of Yeshua HaMashiach can people be saved. The sacrificial system does not work for that purpose. All right, so I forgot to turn that one on, didn't I? All right, so again, the offerings will be a memorial in nature and not for salvation. Verse 18, thus says Adonai Elohim, in the first month, in the first day of the month, take a young bull without blemish and purify the sanctuary. The Kohen will take some of the blood of the sin offering and put it on the doorposts of the house and upon the four corners of the ledge of the altar, upon the post of the gate of the inner court. So you will do on the seventh day of the month for everyone who sins intentionally and through ignorance. So you will make atonement for the house. All right. The first day of the year. Remember, the first day of the year, the religious year is Nisan, or Aviv, same thing. And they were that's also 2 weeks before Passover. So you start that new moon celebration that very first day. The people would bring in a young bull without blemish, a perfect one for a sacrifice, and that his sacrifice cleansed the accumulated sinful defilement of the sanctuary. The priest in charge then was supposed to apply some of the blood of a sin offering to the door frames of the temple and the four corners of the altar of the sacrifice, and then in the door frames of the inner court of the temple. And another offering was to occur on the seventh day of that new year, and it would cover the guilt of sins committed ignorantly. It too would result in the cleansing of the temple for another year. Now, note that these times, if you had there is not an equivalent for that seventh day as such, but because Passover did not begin until, on the 14th of Nisan. The first month, on the 14th day of the month, you will have a Passover, a feast of 7 days when matzah will be eaten. On that day, the prince will prepare a bull as a sin offering for himself and for all the people of the land. He will prepare a burnt offering to Adonai for the 7 days of the feast, 7 bulls, 7 rams without blemish daily for 7 days, and a male goat daily for a sin offering. He will prepare as a grain offering an ephah for a bull, an ephah for a ram, and a hen for each ephah. Whew, confusing. And so on this 14th day of the month, the first month, remember, even today, the 14th day of the first month is what? It's Passover. And so in the future, we won't have to set our calendars ahead or back or anything. The 14th day of that first month of the year, which will be Nisan, the Israelites were to celebrate Passover, and then they were also supposed to do the Feast of Unleavened Bread at that same time. So that same relationship between the Passover and the unleavened bread being together, that's going to be followed on into the millennium. And so we don't really know at this point about those other feasts. I'm just assuming that when it talked about in all the Moedim, that they're talking about the other feast of the Lord, and how that they may have kind of gone their own way there for a little while. So they'll do Passover, and then the next 7 days they'll celebrate the Feast of Unleavened Bread, and then how the Jewish calendar is, that they count the beginning and the ending of their days at sundown, not at sunrise. So the whole combined festivity lasts for 7 days, and they just simply call it Passover. You never really hear people talk about Passover and the Feast of Unleavened Bread. It's just Passover. And so on the day that the Passover prince would offer a bull as a sin offering for himself and the people on that very day of Passover, well, that's when the Passover lambs were sacrificed. And during the 7 days of the Passover festival, the prince would also offer each day now 7 bulls, 7 rams, and without blemish, that as a burnt offering of worship, and 1 ram for a sin offering. Now, he would offer each bull and each ram 1 ephah, which is about a half a bushel of grain, as a grain offering, plus a hin, which is about 1 gallon of oil with the grain. And so this celebrates, some people say obviously, and other people says, well, maybe, and then others said, doubtlessly. This celebrate will doubtless commemorate Yeshua's sacrificial death as the Lamb of God who takes away the sins of the world, and the importance of living sin-free in view of that sacrifice. Now, comments or questions? Carmen?
What do they do with all that food?
Well, that
are they eating it?
Yes. That was that's the portion then that the priests who were on duty got to eat. So the priests,
all those bulls, and how many were there? Go back another page.
7
How
days,
many?
7 per day during the Feast of Passover and Unleavened Bread.
Oh my goodness. How many priests are there? Or is that Is that like
No.
a celebration? Like,
Well, yeah, no, there are, well, heck, there were thousands of priests, but the thing is, the people who made the offering could also participate and take of the offering, other than the burnt offering, which was all burned up, and then the sin offering. They couldn't eat of the sin offering, but they could a guilt offering, they could a fellowship offering, a thanksgiving offering, and so there were other
Okay.
offerings all of the people then could eat, especially the fellowship offerings and the Thanksgiving offerings.
Okay.
Okay.
All right.
All right.
Thank you.
Last one here. He will do this in the 7th month on the 15th day of the month during the feast for 7 days for sin offering, as well as burnt offering, grain offering, as well as oil. On the on this 7th month, the first was the first month and then the 7th month. So basically, they're 6 months apart. On the 15th day of that 7th month, at the feast on that day, which we would call Sukkot now, the prince would repeat this cycle of offerings that he made during Passover. So every 6 months, they go through a 7-day feast with the seven, the sequence of sacrifices there. And so we see that they're going to still be doing Sukkot. There's another reference that I can't remember right offhand, where in the millennium the nations of the world will have to come to Jerusalem on Sukkot and offer some kind of an offering, sacrifice to Yeshua, and if they don't do that, then basically their economy goes in the tank. It said, the Bible says it this way, that it shall not rain on your nation for 1 year. Well, in an agricultural society, if it doesn't rain, then you've lost the farm, and so your economy, if it was on a national level, then your economy would tank. You wouldn't have any economy. All right. So these sacrifices and this Sukkot celebration will be, I think, undoubtedly a celebration of God's faithfulness in bringing the Israelites securely and permanently into the Promised Land, which the Feast of Tabernacles anticipated. So the other, like we'd mentioned, the other feast got no mention at all, just a kind of a hint as passing through there. First fruits, Pentecost, or the Shavuot, which is the Feast of Weeks, or the 50 days after Passover. The Feast of Trumpets, the Day of Atonement. These were not mentioned here, but one commentator says probably they will be absent in the future millennial system. Well, we don't know. I mean, he cautions up a few paragraphs before about don't jump to conclusions. Just because it's not mentioned there in the Bible doesn't mean that it wasn't there, or that they didn't do it, or whatever. The Bible is not an all-inclusive narrative of everything that happened. It hits the high spots in some places, and then when they didn't have anything else better to do, they would start spouting genealogies. And so that's kind of the way that the Bible does things sometimes. All right, so I just don't. The way I look at it, I think we'll still have the other feasts, because the other feasts, the Lord said, they were to be done in perpetuity, and so I think that they will still be doing that.